I've chosen a different topic that's the main topic of my research these days. And that's, how do we solve the world's problems? Now, I know there's a fine line between vision and hallucination, and I want to make it clear. In the next 19 minutes, I'm not going to actually solve the world's problems, but I'm going to describe to you a new model for doing that. If you look around the world today, we have dozens and dozens of global problems. Many of them threaten to bring down the global economy and global society. And many of them are problems that are intolerable for us to take these days. Poverty, climate change, cooking fires, lack of human rights, oppression, conflict. Many of these problems are not getting better. They're stalled, and many of them are worse. They're getting worse. How can this be? In a time of vast human talent, more educated population on the planet than ever, a new global communications medium, we're not making progress on all these urgent problems. Well, are these problems just too hard to solve? Or is our model wrong? Well, let's look at our model. Our model came out of the Second World War, and 42 countries got together in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and they said, we should never have a war like this again, and we need to create a set of global institutions because more and more society is globalizing. So we created the UN and the World Bank of Bretton Woods, and then eventually the IMF and the GATT and the G8 and the G20 and the WTO, global institutions based on nation states. But increasingly, these global institutions are unable to address the problems of the world because arguably the nation state is the wrong size to address global issues. So let's take something like climate change. Some of us, a couple of years ago at Davos, I remember in a session with Bill Clinton, he was saying that if we reduce carbon emissions by 80% in the year 2050, not by 6%, by 80% in the year 2050, it'll still take 1,000 years for the planet to cool down, and in the meantime, some bad things are going to happen. Like you can expect 1.5 billion people to lose half of their water supply in the next 10 to 20 years. So all these global institutions, they go off to Cancun and to Copenhagen and to Rio, and they have these big meetings and they can't seem to get things done. But meanwhile, there's something new that's happening. There are about 20 million people using the internet that are self-organizing on this issue. And they're not Malcolm Gladwell's slacktivists, you know, just because you go like on Facebook, you don't change anything. No! They're people who are actually doing things. They're kids in schoolyards and with campaigns to reduce the carbon they're emitting in their communities, and architects figuring out how to retrofit old buildings. There's a global movement being created around this question that's not based on states. This is the first time where humanity and the world is being mobilized, but we're all roughly on the same side. We've been mobilized before in the world, but we were on different sides, 2 world wars. It turns out that the killer app for the internet may be saving the planet, literally. Now, why is this new model and these new sets of possibilities emerging? Well, 4 big changes. First of all, we have the new social web. And the internet's not about hooking up online, creating a gardening community, or building a .com. It's a new computational platform that radically drops transaction and collaboration costs on a global basis. And every time you go onto this computer called the internet, you're programming it. Whether you're uploading a file or remixing something or doing a Google search, humanity has built a machine that enables us all to collaborate. Secondly, we have a new generation of digital natives. I started studying kids about 20 years ago when I noticed how my own children were effortlessly able to use all this sophisticated technology. And at first I thought my children are prodigies. But then I noticed all their friends were like them, so that was a bad theory. So back in the mid-90s, I dubbed them the net generation. This is the first generation to come of age in the digital age. I did a $4 million research project where we interviewed or surveyed 11,000 young people in 10 countries. This is the first ever global generation. They have a set of norms that exist across all the major countries in the world. Thirdly, we have a social revolution. It's not just that there are a billion people on Facebook. Social media is becoming social production. There's a new means of production in the making. And fourth, we have an economic revolution. Our traditional industrial age institutions are unbundling into networks. We're seeing a change in the deep structure and the architecture of every institution in society, of how we orchestrate capability to innovate, to create goods and services, to create public value. Why wouldn't we see a similar change in how we orchestrate capability to solve global problems? Now, if we step way back and look at this issue of how do we solve problems, hundreds of years ago, there wasn't a global world. We had city-states, and the means of production and political system was called feudalism, and knowledge was tightly concentrated in tiny oligopolies, and people didn't know things. Then along came Johannes Gutenberg with his great invention, and over time, we began to acquire knowledge, and the institutions of feudal society began to appear to be stalled or frozen or failing. It didn't make sense for the church to be responsible for medicine. So we saw the rise of parliamentary democracy. Martin Luther called the printing press God's highest act of grace. We saw the creation of the corporation, the university, science. This led to the Industrial Revolution, and it was all good. The Industrial Revolution came along with the creation of the nation state. Italy wasn't a nation state until 150 years ago. But now, once again, the technology genie is out of the bottle, and this time it's very different. You see, the printing press gave us access to the written word. The internet gives us access to the knowledge and the intelligence contained in the crania of other people on a global basis. Notwithstanding big data, this is not an information age. It's an age of networked intelligence. Now, the nation state is not going to go away in my lifetime, but we need to fundamentally change our models for solving problems. And we now have a burning platform in the world around this issue. We're stalled. You know the burning platform idea, that you're somewhere where the costs of staying where you are become much greater than the cost of moving to something radically different. So what is the new model? Is this it? Who here has seen the Kony 2012 video? Hands, please. Hold up your hands. Okay, those of you who haven't, this is your first homework assignment. It's a half-hour video. It came out about, what, 5 months ago, 6 months ago? I watched the video on a Monday night. 12,000 people had seen it. On Friday, it had been seen by 85 million people. Joseph Kony is a Ugandan warlord. He's a bad guy. He's part of a global problem called warlords. He's kidnapped, allegedly, 60,000 children. The girls become sex slaves. The boys become soldiers. If they disobey, he cuts off their face or makes them go and kill their families. He's a bad guy. So this multi-stakeholder network called Invisible Children said, we want to make Joseph Kony famous, because no one had heard of him. So this video has now been seen by close to 100 million people. Now, this is extraordinary. They succeeded. The US Congress took action. But what is this thing? Is it legitimate? Where did the money go? Who's it accountable to? What happens when your leader has a meltdown, as in the case of Kony? How do you have representation? Is it the right policy that there should be more US troops in Uganda? These new models raise a million issues. Now I call them global solution networks. What are they? Well, they have a number of characteristics. First of all, they're multi-stakeholder. They involve some combination of the state academia, the civil society, the private sector, and individuals. Because individuals can now be pillars of society. Two 20-year-olds in Boston can save the life of a 7-year-old girl buried in the rubble in Port-au-Prince after the Haitian earthquake by going onto the Ushahidi network, triangulating her location, advising the authorities, and saving her life. So that's number one. They're not state-based. They may involve governments, but they're not based on states. Secondly, they're beyond a nation state. They're addressing a global problem, but they don't have to be global. Thirdly, they're trying to improve the state of the world. So Al-Qaeda, for example, would not be in my category of global solution networks because by any reasonable assessment, they're not trying to improve the state of the world. Fourth, they use the internet and networking as a foundation for them. And fifth, they're harnessing the power of self-organization. Now, just a quick story on this. This is not a multi-stakeholder network, but it's a good point. It was about 6 years ago, someone sent me an email saying, you know this guy, Barack Obama, he thinks your book, Wikonomics, is the key to winning the presidency and changing America. Go to mybarackobama.com. So I went there, and there's my book right on the screen. It says, we believe in the principles of self-organization, the use of the internet, and the book, Wikonomics by Don Tapscott. He says, I'm asking you to believe not just in my ability to bring about real change in Washington, I'm asking you to believe in yours. And I looked at this thing, and well, my first reaction was, I am the man. But not so fast, because it turns out I'm not the man. Because there's a Wikonomics community, but there's also a Single Moms for Daycare for Obama community, and there's a Young Firefighters for Obama community. He created a platform whereby 35,000 communities self-organized. That's how he beat Hillary Clinton, and that's what brought him to power. Self-organization. It's a powerful new force. So we've got this new model. But here's the thing. Nobody knows anything about them. It's like the elephant and the blindfolded person. We know lots about global governance. We know lots about NGOs. We don't know anything about these new global solution networks. So I've launched a multi-million-dollar research project, and I'd like to share with you my first big finding. And that's a taxonomy to talk about these networks. See, it turns out there's not one type. There are a whole bunch of different types of networks. And these are very different. I'm going to fly through these in 5 minutes. And I'm going to ask you at the end, there's going to be a test, to see if you can tell the difference. First of all, we have knowledge networks. Now, knowledge networks, their primary function is not to advocate like Coney, it's simply to develop knowledge. Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Global Network for Women and Children's Health, Habitat Jam, Wikipedia, TED, DLD, these would be knowledge networks. Secondly, we have what I call operational and delivery networks. These are networks that actually intervene and do something. Do you know, around the Hurricane Sandy, many people said that crisis commons and these global solution networks were more effective than the Red Cross. They actually go and do something. So Kiva, for example, sorry, this thing isn't working here. Do we have another beeper by any chance? Yeah. So for some reason, the World Bank can't get a $70 pump to farmers in sub-Saharan Africa where if they stand on the pump, they can irrigate a whole field. So Kiva does mass collaboration, raises $400 million, and actually goes and solves a problem. There are no states involved. It's not based on a government. Then we have policy networks. This is crazy. We have government policy being created by non-government organizations, new multi-stakeholder networks, and they get adopted by states and even by global institutions. Some good examples of a governance network would, a policy network would be the International Competition Network. But you've got the Internet Governance Forum, the PRI, Principles for Responsible Investment, and so on. Then we have Coney in that example. There are thousands of advocacy networks listed on advocacy.org. They're advocating. They're trying to get some institution to change its approach, whether it's a corporation or a government. And these things can involve tens of millions of people, and they can happen like a prairie fire overnight. A vase. Any of you on the mailing list for a vase? Tens of millions of people this thing reaches out to around climate change. Then we have watchdog networks. They're in the transparency business. They're scrutinizing companies, governments, global institutions. And that's a good thing because sunlight is the best disinfectant. And when institutions become naked, well, there's some corollaries. Fitness is no longer optional if you're naked. You know, you got to get buff. And that means you got to clean up your act. And this is a wonderful thing. Topics can range from human rights, corruption, the environment, to financial services. Human Rights Watch would be a great example, but the Environmental Working Group, Amnesty International, the Global Reporting Initiative, and so on. Then we have platforms. This is a whole new one. I've named it platforms. These are networks that are not trying to solve a problem of cooking fires or human rights or poverty or climate change. They're creating a platform for others to be able to do that. And there are all kinds of these incredible platforms that are emerging now. This is one I discovered recently called Sojo. You want to change the world? You can build a multi-stakeholder network really rapidly on one of these platforms. Whereas in the past, you had to go and create a whole thing yourself. Then we have this, Tim Berners-Lee talked me into this category here. It's called Global Standards Networks. Now, these are very different than things like the International Standards Organizations. These are networks that are developing global standards being adopted in the world, but there are no governments involved. This is extraordinary. Governments were always the things that created standards. So the World Wide Web Consortium is creating standards for the web. No governments involved. Then we have, this is a crazy one, what I call governance networks. These are networks that are actually governing something in the world, but there aren't governments. Now, the best example of that would be ICANN. And you know, ICANN and the internet ecosystem came up into battle in Dubai just before Christmas, where the old institution, the UN and its ITU, tried to get control of the internet. So people like Vladimir Putin were saying, if states control the internet, we can have a much better internet that doesn't tell lies, for example. So the old institutions fought the internet, and the internet won. Now, they won with the help of some states, and the US State Department would be a great example of that. But these are important things in the world that require actual governance are now being governed by non-state institutions. And the final one is what I call networked institutions. These things are so elaborate and they do so much stuff, they're starting to look like a little mini UN. They're actually becoming a sort of institution, but they're not based on states, they're based on networks. So a number of us here are off to Davos today. The World Economic Forum, the Clinton Global Initiative, the Global Water Partnership, Business for Social Responsibility. These are all becoming global institutions. So it turns out that there's not one kind of global solution network. There are 9 different types. It's unbelievable to me that there are no books, there are no case studies, there's no literature, there are no best practices, there are no business schools studying this, and no political schools. A whole new model of solving the world's problems, we don't know anything about them. So I'd like to close by appealing to you to join in. I think we can move to a new age of governance. First, we created these global institutions. They were based on states. There was a weak public mandate, and citizens were inert. Now we're moving into an age of participation, and we can have a new model of global problem solving based on self-organization, public deliberation, networking, and a culture of active citizenship. The only thing that's missing is leadership. And this is a new paradigm that I'm talking about, a new mental model. And when you get one of these, you get a crisis of leadership. New paradigms are received with coolness, mockery, hostility. Vested interests fight change, and leaders of old paradigms have great difficulty embracing the new. So join us. It's called the Global Solutions Network program. It's a not-for-profit. I'm working pro bono. It's half of my time on this thing. We're bringing together an extraordinary group of institutions and many of the world's leading thinkers on these issues, and we'd love to have you involved. We're at a turning point here. This is not some weird recession that double dips and so on. We're at a punctuation point in human history where we need to move away from the old industrial age institutions where people were inert and where they were passive, to a new set of institutions where people are active and where they can participate fully in the economy and in life. And if we do that, well, maybe this smaller world that our kids inherit will be a better one. And this age of networked intelligence will be an age where global promise is fulfilled and where peril is unrequited. Thank you very much.